back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, I am here today to do a book review, and the book I'm going to be reviewing is this monster of a book which I finally read. It is Perdido Street Station by China Miéville, and it was my first book by China Miéville, and I'm so glad I finally got to one of his books in Tome Topple because I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun. I actually did a buddy read of this with James, whose channel I will link below. We had so much fun chatting about this because there is a lot to digest and a lot to take in and talk about. It's a crazy world, and when I say that it's crazy, it is one of the most unique things I've ever read. I've never read another world like it because it is so visceral. I think visceral is the best word to describe it. It's very visceral, it's very grotty and gringy and dark and grimy. It's very much a place I would not want to visit, and it's all set in New Crobazone, which is the main town or city, I suppose, where this whole adventure takes place. We are following two main characters. Their names are Lynn, and she is a Kelpie. They're basically an insectoid race of... They have insects as heads, essentially. It's like they have a stag beetle for a head, and then they're human from the neck down. It's a very weird concept, but roll with me here. She cannot talk because she has an insect head, so what she does is a kind of sign language, but she does have the ability to talk with other insect-like creatures because obviously they use different noises. She is an artist and she makes art using this horrible sounding saliva mixed thing that basically hardens with her saliva, and she can sculpt it into various sculptures and pieces. So she's quite a established sculptor. People know about her, they're interested in her work, but she's never really had a big commission until she gets a job from a gangster-like character who is a bit shady, and she doesn't really want to tell anyone she's got the job because she's a bit worried about it, but she takes the job and she starts making this epic sculpture which will make her fortune if it all works out. Of course it doesn't, but we'll go into that more. So she is our first character. The second character is called Isaac. He is an inventor. He is hugely into theory and science and basically being a crazy mad inventor. He is the definition of that. He lives on his own, but he and Lynn are lovers, and so they meet up for secret trysts together every now and then. He does not really know too many people besides Lynn from her sort of community. Most of the people he knows are various scientists like him, so their walks of life are quite different because she comes from a kind of slum-like area. I mean, there are slums all over the city basically, and her area of different people and families are not necessarily associated with the humans like Isaac. There are definite ranks in society, and her area doesn't really rank as high as the humans. So it's kind of a secret that they're lovers, but he does his work in a different part of town from her, and he is researching something called crisis theory, which we learn a lot more about as the book goes on. He is definitely a wacky character. He's quite rude, he's quite blunt and crude, he doesn't mind swearing his mouth off at everyone, and he's quite a loudmouth character. Who's got a lot of personality, which is not necessarily a bad thing because he was quite witty at times, but he is not great with his opinions. He's quite vocal about them and they're not always right. He's a very interesting character though, and I did enjoy reading both of the characters. I think they worked quite well as a pair and were quite unexpected as a pair, but I liked them. So yeah, I liked the relationship that they had. As the story goes on, we get introduced to a new character who's called Yag, and Yag is kind of like a bird-like character, and he comes from another set of people in this world, another different race. There are so many different races in this world, it's insane how many different types of people and insect and creature there are who all live in tandem. I'm not saying they are peaceful necessarily, but they all kind of coexist together and they work well, even though they're all very different. They're from completely different walks of life and society and their breeding and their culture and everything is different, but they all kind of coexist in this one crazy city. And Yag is from a different race. He is classed by a lot of people as a birdman, which is kind of the slang for what he is. And he has come to Isaac to ask Isaac to create him a new pair of wings. So Yag has had his wings taken in exchange for a really heinous crime that he has supposedly committed back in his homeland. Isaac never really knows what this crime is. He's not really interested, because the problem of creating wings that will actually fly someone and are attached to the tendons within Yag is such an interesting and fascinating, difficult project for him that he is instantly hooked. He agrees, and that is where the story takes off from. Now, this book is definitely a cross-genre book. It definitely feels like it has huge amounts of fantasy elements in the world building, the setup, the steampunk elements within it come under fantasy, and yet there is a huge amount of focus on science as well, because the scientist of Isaac is always telling us about the new sciences he's created, the new ideas, the new theories, the new fascinating ways of doing things that he has come up with in order to prove a point or experiment or anything like that. Science fiction and fantasy are hugely blended in this book. We also have things like steampunk. I would say this is set in a kind of steam era. Even though it's a completely different kind of world, there is definitely steam elements in the world, and some of the mechanisms he uses and the laboratory he works in really do sound like they're from a Victorian England style world. We also have horror elements later on in the story. You might be able to tell that there is this kind of strange design on the cover. I'm not going to say what it relates to necessarily, but there is a huge amount of story that relates to this cover. It's a really good cover design by someone called Crush, or a company called Crush, and I think it works incredibly well with the story that we get in this book, because once you read the book you know what this relates to, and it's definitely a huge part of the story. I'm not going to spoil it because I think there's a lot to discover in this book, and I think it's a long read, but actually it felt very quick to me. There are horror elements. I would say I'm not a horror fan at all. I'm a complete wuss, if I'm honest. I'm a scaredy cat. So if you're a scaredy cat like me, it's not scary in like a really creepy way. It's just there are some things that are quite brutal and quite visceral and quite gruesome, but yeah, this whole book is like that, so it's not just one bit, it's all like that. If you don't like that, you're not going to like this, but if you can handle that, yeah, give it a try. I think it's mad. Honestly, this book is hard to describe. It's very gritty. It has a life of its own, a soul of its own, a uniqueness that I've never seen in any other writer, and I definitely intend to pick up more by China Miéville now that I've read this huge tome, because I feel like he is a writer that I have been missing out on by not reading more. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars in the end, because I just felt like the ending is quite sudden and quite abrupt, and there's some really sad things that happen, and there's some really anger-inducing things that happen, but I still wanted a little bit more closure than I got, so that's why it gets 4 stars. But honestly, I really enjoyed the adventure of this, and although I think it has a slower start, I do think it builds into something super fascinating and super crazy. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, maybe give this one a go. I did audiobook a lot of this, so I'd recommend that if you are kind of a bit intimidated by the size. The audiobook's really good. And yeah, that is my review for Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of his work, or if you plan on picking it up yourself. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.